Hey everyone, welcome back to Apologetically Unapologetic. I've got a raw, real moment I want to share with you tonight. My son tried out for his dream baseball team a couple weeks ago. The kind of team he's been chasing since he was 8. He worked hard, he believed, he hoped, and when we got the call back from the coach, he didn't make the cut. Now, as a father, I'm proud of his effort. But as a believer, I also know this is exactly one of those moments where I can teach, not just about baseball, but about failure, about faith, about God's purpose. I remember how I taught him the old Cherokee story of the two wolves inside of us. One destructive, one constructive. And how our actions, our thoughts, how we feed one or the other. I also thought back to a story in the Bible. In the book of Genesis, chapter 42, the sons of Jacob face a desperate famine. They go down to Egypt and run headlong into failure, fear, and regret. Tonight, I want to show how this chapter holds a deep apologetic lesson. Why God allows failure. Because if your life just gives you wins, you'll never see your need for Him. Your need for repentance. Your need for transformation. So whether you're watching because you failed lately, or you're supporting someone who has, stick with me. By the end of this video, I hope that you'll see failure isn't the end of the story. It may be the door to something greater. Let's read together from Genesis 42, 18 through 20. And Joseph said to them on the third day, "Do this and live, for I fear God. If you're honest men, let one of your brothers be bound in prison. Go, carry for the famine of your houses, and bring your youngest brother to me. Then your words will be verified, and you shall not die." And they did so. They said to one another, "We are guilty concerning our brother." Perhaps no passage states it more starkly. There's opportunity to live after failure, but only through truth, through acknowledgement. In Genesis 42, the situation is dire. A famine sweeps the land of Canaan. The sons of Jacob are starving. Verse 1 tells us, "Now when Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, 'Why do you look at one another?'" What a question. He saw fear in their eyes. They knew the famine was more than physical. Their hearts bore guilt, regret, unaddressed sin. As commentator David Guzik notes, Joseph's brothers lived with a terrible secret for 20 years. Any mention of Joseph or Egypt brought back the guilt. Guilt is often the fuel of failure. Not just the event, but the unaddressed event. We live in the memory of loss, stuck in if-only loops, paralyzed by shame. Now, I told my son, a failure is an opportunity to learn. I told him, one wolf you feed is destruction. I failed, so I'll prove them wrong. The other is construction. I failed, so I'll learn to grow. In Genesis 42, we see that the brothers are given famine, not just for punishment, but for transformation. The famine drives them into Egypt, the land of the one they betrayed. It forces them into humility, into a position of need. It forces the question, Who do I really depend on? Vadi Bakum often reminds us that the moral conscience, our sense of right and wrong, of guilt and responsibility, is one of the strongest indicators of a moral lawgiver. Failure activates that conscience. The rotten fruit is revealed, the root is exposed, and in the narrative, God uses that exposure not merely to condemn, but to redeem. But you might be saying, okay, great story, but is there an apologetic point for me? Yes. Here's the piece. If the world is only random atoms and chance, then failure is meaningless and shame is absurd. But if we are created in the image of a loving, sovereign God, then failure matters. It wounds the maker. It prompts correction. It points to a redeemer. That's the key apologetic result. Human conscience, regret, the drive to change, all point to a designed moral universe. Let's zoom in on two aspects of Genesis 42 that speak directly to the lesson I told my son and to our lives after failure. Before we dive into these 2 points, I want to explain another anecdote that I gave my son. In addition to the story of the 2 wolves, I further related it to how we build a campfire. For a campfire, you need 3 things. You need fuel, which is wood. You need heat from either friction or a spark to start a campfire. And then you also need oxygen so the campfire can breathe and grow. I related the 2 wolves as 2 separate campfires. Again, one representing destruction and one representing construction. We have the fuel in what we already have within our circumstances. We have the heat within our response to those circumstances. And then the oxygen is the thoughts that we allow to feed that fire that's being built on our circumstances and our responses. First, the fuel of the shell game. Failure exposes the hidden. Joseph in Egypt recognizes his brothers, but they don't recognize him. In verse 8, and Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. That recognition is crucial. It shows that in failure-driven circumstances, truths emerge about our character, about our relationships, about our dependence. The brothers thought the issue was famine. The issue was them. The scenario forced the revelation. They couldn't hide what was wrong any longer. That's the fuel. In your life, your failure may be the external thing. You didn't get the tryout. You weren't promoted. You lost the contract. But the real test is, what's exposed in your heart? One wolf wants to feed bitterness. The other wants to feed growth. Like A.W. Tozer once said, what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. Failure invites that reflection. What are you thinking? What are you feeding? Second, the heat and oxygen of our response. Failure invites repentance and redemption. Verse 21 and 22 speak to the internal conviction. Then they said to one another, we are guilty concerning our brother, and that we saw the distress of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not listen. That is why this distress has come upon us. See, the brothers didn't immediately say, we deserve this. Instead, they said, we are guilty. Guilt is not shame alone. It's the recognition of wrong. That's the spark. The heat, our actions. The oxygen, our thoughts that light the fire. They said, "What is this that God has done to us?" Theologically, if you cannot say God did this when you're in the valley, you'll just say life did this, or luck did this, or sin did this without significance. But when you say, "What is this that God has done to us?" you affirm that you are in a moral economy. You are responding to a maker. Commentator Matthew Henry writes, "Their return to Canaan with corn and the great distress their good father was in upon hearing the account of their expedition." In other words, they carried bread, but they also carried a burden. Failure produced bread or provision, but not without pain. And pain leads to asking deeper questions. Now, remember the story I told my son about the fire? The piles of wood are laid, either for destruction, wood, or construction wood. The fuel are circumstances, plus the heat are actions, plus the oxygen are thoughts. In your life, the fuel of the test, the rejection, the missed team, they are given. The heat, that's your response. The oxygen, that's your reflection and choice. Which pile are you feeding? And here is the huge apologetic lesson. The world doesn't want to believe failure is meaningful. But here it is being given meaning. God uses it. In Genesis 42, the famine and the failure are part of God's sovereignty. The world thinks randomness. The text says purpose. Now, the famine was in the land of Canaan also. So Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt. The famine forced them to go to Egypt, the very land Joseph was in, and the land that they had avoided. God's plan used their mistake, their betrayal, their silence decades ago. That means nothing's wasted. Nothing's powerless. Apologist Frank Turk often says that the universe we observe, including moral failure, is only intelligible if there is a mind behind it. He writes, "If everything is simply matter in motion, then how do you explain moral obligation, guilt, the drive to do good rather than evil? Failure, when seen rightly, becomes an apologetic argument, because only in a moral universe can you fail. And if you can fail, you can be redeemed." So what do you do when the roster comes back and you didn't make it? Or when the contract was awarded to someone else? Or when the dream dissolves into disappointment? Acknowledge the failure. Don't sugarcoat it. The brothers said, "We are guilty." That's maturity. If you bypass that, you'll drift into blame or bitterness. Ask the right question. Not just, "Why me?" but "What is God doing in this?" As C.S. Lewis once said, God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. Pain isn't proof of absence. It's an amplifier of presence. Feed the constructive wolf. Your actions matter. Decide to learn. Decide to grow. Ask, what did I do? What will I change? The brothers brought pain, but they also brought confession. Trust the Redeemer. The text ends with provision of grain and the return to Jacob, but that's not the end. God is still moving. Failure didn't freeze the story, it moved it forward. I told my son, This trial is a chapter, not the entire book. God is writing the story with redemptive arcs. In your faith journey, the apologetic isn't just proof, it's hope. You can demonstrate God's existence through the fact that even your failures matter, because you matter to God. If this message resonated with you, hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with a friend who's wrestling with disappointment. In the comments, leave what failure you're using for growth. In the upcoming weeks, I'll feature one of your stories as we continue exploring how God works through our setbacks. Thank you for being a part of Apologetically Unapologetic. Until next Saturday at 6:15 p.m. Eastern Time, stay grounded in truth, full of grace, and unapologetically for the gospel. May God keep you and bless you.